Hey, what is up? It's Dr. Vibe here, speaking your blessed, highly favored, a magnet for miracles and a solution for someone's problem. I am your host and producer of the Dr. Vibe Show, 2012 Black Web Blog Awards winner, Best International Blog, three-time finalist in the Black Web Blog Awards in the Best Podcasts category. I am the monthly host for the Good Men Project's premium members Google Hangouts, and had a wonderful one last night, but do check them out. They are good stuff. And the Good Men Project is averaging 3 million page views a week. Yes, 3 million page views a week. So I'm blessed and highly favored to be part of that initiative. If you want to touch base with us tonight, it's at DRVIBESHOW. And let's get right into it. Dr. Christopher Stuart Taylor back again. And you're saying, yes, so soon? So soon? Well, because so many people watched the first conversation that we had and listened to it on download, we had to have him back, and he has so much to share, and he found time from his schedule dealing with all those students to fit in with us. So he's back on with us tonight. Dr. Chris, what is up?
Abe, thank you once again for the invite. Good evening, everybody. I really appreciate everybody, all the feedback I got from the first one, and hopefully this is just as good and better.
It will be just as good and better. We don't believe in bad. We believe in good and better.
All right, let's do it.
Not better, better. B-E-T-A. That's what we believe in. So before we get into our role here in our journey, can you give a little short background about yourself for those people who do not know who you are?
Yes. So I am a professor. Well, that's one part of the things I do. I'm a sessional professor at University of Western Ontario, and also the King's University College at Western. So I teach two courses. One of the courses is in Canadian history since Confederation, and the other course, which like my pet project, my baby, is Black Canadian Women's History. So hopefully some of my students have tuned in. I tweeted it out under our course hashtag, which is hashtag WS3330G, and I encourage you guys to send in your questions, send in your opinions. I mean, we can talk about it on Tuesday afternoon, Tuesday evening in class, but, you know, get involved. And as I said, I'm a professor, I'm a writer, I blog, I'm an athlete, whole shebang. I try to do a little bit of everything.
And he never sleeps.
No, no sleep. No sleep.
No sleep. No sleep. I was told many years ago, sleep's overrated. But we'll leave that for another conversation. So
right.
We were chatting via Twitter a few days ago,
yes,
and we were saying, what are we going to talk about? What are we going to talk about? And you brought up the subject of black privilege.
Yes, I did.
And you know you're in for some fun tonight, Dr. Chris, with yes, this one. And you're probably going to make my Twitter fingers work extra hard tonight in regards to this. So why, and then I added on, does it exist?
Mm-hmm.
So it's a combo effort for us tonight. Why did you want to share or talk about this issue of black privilege, and does it exist?
So it all came out of the concept of, we've all heard of it, white privilege. Right? So one day I was sitting around, I was thinking, okay, you know what? White privilege, white privilege, white privilege, white privilege. We talk about it, we talk about things like white guilt and how it's bad. And I thought to myself, you know what? There's no problem. There's nothing fundamentally wrong with being white. You can't choose what color you are when you're born. You don't. And at the same time, I started to deconstruct it, and I said, okay, you know what? It's no problem to be white, and there's also no problem to be privileged if you separate the two. There's a difference when you talk about white privilege. White privilege comes with a lot of baggage to it. White privilege is when you use your whiteness to take advantages in life and take advantages in the world, whether it's your career, whether it's just walking through the street, getting on a bus. Those are things with white privilege. But just to say, you know what, my parents, who happen to be white, and I am white, provided me with certain things in life. I should not be ashamed of that. And the big but, there's a huge but to that. I'm not saying that every single white man out there running around who's a CEO and CFO of companies say, yeah, you know what, I'm a white man, there's no problem with that. Pause. The thing with that, you need to acknowledge. You need to acknowledge that your whiteness and your maleness got you to that position. And since you're in that position, you need to acknowledge that and try to change the system. That's the whole part to it. I can't blame somebody for being white. I can't blame somebody for what their parents provided them. However, I can blame them for using that power to keep that place that they're in society all to themselves. And so when I started to think about white privilege, I started to pull things back. I was like, okay, white privilege. Is there something called black privilege? You know, if we look at the two, if we start looking at what privilege is, can black people have that same type of privilege? And, you know, it's a situation where I started to think, okay, maybe it's possible. And I started to think about my own life. And I started to think, okay, well, my parents provided me with certain things in life, and I'm come from a privileged place. And I also happen to be black. So, okay, maybe there is something called black privilege. And I started to run with that idea and start to think, okay, there could be black privilege, but the problem is, and what we talked about the first time I was here on the Google Hangout, was, we have this perception of what it means to be black. It's this negative perception of what it means to be black. So for us to think that your blackness can actually benefit you is it's like an oxymoron. It doesn't work together. But then if you start deconstructing what blackness is and black identity, yes, it is possible to be black and also to be privileged.
Okay, so let's drill down on a few things.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's take it. So let's take the whole, and we won't spend a lot of time on it, but white privilege.
Yes.
Why, if you feel that exists, why do you feel that whites do not want to acknowledge that they have privilege?
Because they don't want to acknowledge that just because of who they are and not by merit is that where they got to in life. They don't want to say, oh man, you know what, I spent 4 years getting an undergraduate degree, I spent 3 years getting a law degree, I spent 10 years in a firm practicing my eyes out to become partner, and that's how I made it. You know, they believe in this meritocracy, but then they don't want to acknowledge that, okay, maybe they still had to go to class, maybe they still had to do the work, but the system that, I'll even use the word, the system that privileges white privilege, push them along. You know, they already started on a foundation ahead of everybody else. And I gotta say this, white men. You know, because when we start talking about gender differences and gender dynamics, that's a whole different discussion as well. So I don't think people want to say, you know what, I didn't have to work as hard to get where I am. And it's this feeling of inadequacy. You know, like, I didn't really have to go to class that much, you know what I mean? I didn't really have to study that much for the exam or for the job interview because my father knew the guy who runs the company. Or I already have this cultural capital because since I was 10 years old, my father was taking me to the country club and I was sitting with his golf buddies. You know what I mean? Like, they don't want to acknowledge that. So it's kind of taken away that they didn't have to work as hard as everybody else.
Okay, well, now let's focus on the area of black privilege.
Yeah.
You know that enough black people are going to say you are crazy.
I know.
To say
I know
that blacks have privilege. So give me some examples from you of black privilege.
I'll give one person an example first. And this is why I talk about black privilege. And this is why I have to deconstruct. You have to separate black and privilege. Like, I am a privileged black person. Like, we have to separate those two. That's why I say I don't have a problem with white people who happen to be privileged, but I have a problem with white privilege. So the white privilege, when you don't acknowledge that your whiteness, your maleness, and so on and so forth, got you to a point in your life. So then I start talking, if you want to look at my personal example, I look at, okay, my family, my parents were immigrants. They worked extra hard, 10 times as hard as we talked about last time, to get into a position that I did not have to work as hard as them to succeed in life. They provided me a platform. And there's a lot of others, and I'll say a lot of second generation children out there, or not even children, adults out there, whose parents did the same thing for them. And that is privilege. And that's what I mean, we got to start seeing that privilege isn't necessarily a negative thing. So my parents provided me with things, and they provided me with a situation and a life that I did not have to work as hard as them. They gave me a platform. Yes, that platform may not have been a country club with the golf buddies, but at the same time, they gave me this educational platform that I had a roof under my head. I had good examples of being of a good father, of a good parent, of how to be a man, how to be an adult, and those are things that I see as privilege as well. And if you want to take it on the flip side, and outside of my life, let's look at somebody like Drake. Okay? Drake, one of his most popular songs was Started from the Bottom. Okay? So it's this idea that if you're black, you can't have any privilege. I was watching the Raptors game the other day, and Drake had a sweater emblazoned with Forest Hill. Right? We all know, if you're from the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, that Drake did not come from the bottom. But for him to have any kind of notoriety, he had to say, you know what, I had nothing starting. I had nothing. I had to pull myself up from my bootstraps. But my issue with that is, what you do, you're doing a disservice to your parents. You're doing a disservice to your parents who worked extra hard so you didn't have to. And I think that's where the disconnect comes in, when we don't acknowledge that, okay, I don't have any privilege, but if I'm looking at privilege in terms of what my parents did, I think that is something that should be celebrated.
So are you saying then this lack of acknowledgement
Yes.
of privilege, why does it exist?
For black people, I think for black people too, and this is a topic that I kind of want to talk about. I wish I had more time again, but I want to talk about last time, is that when we start talking about the black community, right? We talk about this monolithic black community that we're all together, which is false. That is fundamentally false. That is an idea, if you want to get all theoretical, of a false consciousness that we are all one community. Yes, we all need to work together as a community, but there's so many social economic differences, and differences in terms of class and differences in terms of privilege, that if we keep on saying that, okay, my parents helped me to get this place because of their educational background, and if I'm looking at my brother across the street who didn't have that, who didn't have a father in the home, and who had to work so hard on his own, I'm really separating. I'm setting a wedge between us. And so it works both ways. It's kind of like, I don't want to acknowledge my privilege because I know that is not the norm, especially in North America. Who I am is not necessarily the norm. So for me to come out there and say, you know what, I was privileged, I got this, I got that, you know, I didn't have to work as hard as somebody else, I'm basically doing the turncoat. I'm doing the you know what, I'm too good for my own people kind of thing, and that's not what I'm trying to get across. I'm trying to get across, you just need to acknowledge what you have and who got you there.
So with this existence of black privilege,
Yes.
do you feel that in any way it's causing a divide in the black community?
Hands down, I do. Hands down. Hands down. And the problem that I see with it is because we don't acknowledge it. You get the problems of when you hear the debates all the time, you know what, how come since I did it, and I'm saying I as a black man, whether I had two parents in the home or whatever, what have you, because I did it, why can't you do it? Why can't you do it? You had the same opportunities that I had. Free education, so free primary, secondary education. You had access to the same programs that I did. So how come you couldn't do it? And I think that's the kind of wedge we're driving in between ourselves. And I'm not saying to keep on driving wedges. I'm just saying, you know what, acknowledge that we are different, but we are the same. Acknowledge that, okay, yes, I may have had more than you growing up, but that doesn't necessarily make me better. It's just a fact. I didn't choose this, nor did you choose that. Just acknowledge it. And once we acknowledge it, we can have an open dialogue and an open conversation. It's the whole thing we hear all the time is who has the right to speak for the black community? You hear it all the time. You have the university professors, people like myself that go to the ivory tower, that get the PhDs, are speaking for marginalized groups. It's not just black people, it's all types of groups. You have all these academics speaking for the voiceless, the marginalized. And do you have a right to do that? And right there and then, that's privilege right there. I had the privilege to go and get an education, so now I'm speaking for you. But if I acknowledge my privilege, if I acknowledge that, okay, you know what, I had the opportunity to go to school and do this, and we can all sit at the same table, and I can check my ego at the door, I think that's a much more honest conversation.
So Is this privilege causing it's causing a divided black community? Is it so? Is this privilege a class divide based on class divide? Is it a knowledge divide? What's the basis of this black privilege concern or issue?
I think it's the class divide. I mean, when it comes down to it, privilege is about socioeconomic class. And so what happens is you have, and I'll say it again, again, I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for all black PhDs. I'm not speaking for all black academics. I'm speaking for myself. So what happens is, it's like the same situation where somebody like myself, grows up in a suburb, as I said, went to French immersion, get the degrees, and so on and so forth. It turns into a situation where when I'm picking up the Toronto Star or I'm watching CNN, and the first thing that I'm getting bombarded with is these black people who are getting imprisoned or killed and shot, I'm like, oh, that's not me. That's not me. That's not me. That's somebody else. But then we're all being painted with the same brush. So it's almost this animosity that the privileged blacks have to say, you know what, you're really bringing us down, because when I walk down the street, nobody's going to see me as the guy that went to Harvard, Yale. Let's take, for example, Richard Sherman, who went to Stanford. You're not seeing me. You're seeing all the other guys that didn't get degrees. You're seeing all the druggies and the drug dealers and all that kind of stuff. So yes, it is driving a serious wedge between the classes within the black community.
When you discuss this subject, or I don't know, maybe I'm being presumptuous,
Yep.
do you discuss this issue of black privilege with your students, and what are their responses? What are they telling you? What are they coming back with you at?
Funny enough, I haven't done it yet. These are conversations I actually have within my family. And I have these conversations where I'm like, you know what, Mom, we come from a privileged place. And I'm not saying her, but I'm saying my sister and we come from a privileged place. I'm privileged because you provided me with certain things that you didn't have at my age. And so it's one of those things that I think we need to look inwards first before we can start having discussions. Because that's the problem. I'm going to speak for Canada. We don't talk about class in Canada. We talk about everybody as a part of the middle class. We don't talk about, you know what, somebody's struggling. We don't say that. We talk about we're all equal, we're all the same, and that's not the case. It's the same thing like the black community. Within the black community, we all don't have the same problems. We all don't have the same socioeconomic problems. How come, say, for example, we talk about programs for black kids in school who are struggling, but you never hear about programs for black kids who are gifted? You never hear about programs for black kids who are gifted in the arts. You never hear about programs for blacks about getting RSPs. Yes, we have things now with black entrepreneurship, and there's a growing bastion of these programs for these upper middle class blacks, but that is not in the mainstream. That's not accepted as the norm.
So how can you, who realizes that they have black privilege,
Yep.
relate to a black person who does not feel that they have black privilege?
It's the same thing with now. I teach a class, one of the classes I teach in the women's studies department. So I'm teaching a class full of women. And so the question comes up, you know, how can I teach about women's history? How can I teach women? The first thing is I check my ego at the door. You know, I check who I am at the door. I understand who I am first. And I understand what I say and what I do can affect, and sorry, not just what I say and what I do, but who I am can affect the conversation. So if I'm sitting down with somebody, another black person who may not be in the same class or the same educational background that I have, I check that at the door. I'm not going to sit there and say, you know, how come you don't know about this stuff about black identity? How come you don't know about your black history? How come you haven't sat there and studied for X amount of years at the University of Toronto or Penn State? How come you haven't done that? And he comes back to me and says, well, because when I was in grade 12 or in the 12th grade, I had to go and work because I needed to put food on my table. And so if I'm looking down at him and he's looking down at me, then we're not going to get anywhere. But if we both check things at the door and understand, okay, well, I was lucky enough that I didn't have to do that. I was lucky enough that I could go to school. I was lucky enough that I not only could I get an undergraduate degree, but I was lucky enough that I could go and get a graduate degree and a PhD. I was lucky enough. And that's my privilege. So I got to check that before I have these conversations. So I can't go and say, you know what, you need to do better. You need to do this. You need to do that. No, because our situations are completely different. If I sit there and say, okay, let me hear your story. And if I hear his story, I can relate so much better to him because I check my ego at the door. I'm listening to his story. And we're having an honest conversation. If I sit there and say, you know what, yeah, I hear you. I hear you. I didn't live the same life as you, but I hear you. I understand. I can empathize with that. I can't. I may not have lived that, but I can. But if I'm coming there with these ideals and these goals, a top-down approach to how he should live his life, that's completely false. And I think that's where the antagonism and that's where the divide comes because we, and I say this all the time, when you look at these think tanks, when you look at the people that are trying to change and help the black community, these are people like myself. The voiceless, the marginalized, the ones that need the help. We're not listening. We're picking up books, we're theorizing, but then we're going home and eating our dinners and feeling fine with our degrees. You know what I mean? We don't really understand what's happening. This huge divide. We got to sit at a table and check our egos, man. We have to do that.
Do you think that, and I know you're only speaking from a black Canadian perspective, but I'm making an assumption that you've done some traveling outside of Canada.
Yes, I have. Yes.
So does this black privilege situation, in your eyes, not just exist in Black Canada?
Oh, of course not, man. I'm telling you, in the Caribbean, if anybody who has grown up in, I'll call it a quote-unquote all-black society, that is when you really start understanding class and privilege. Case in point, if you go to a school in, I'll use Barbados as an example because I know Barbados well. You go to a certain school in Barbados, you have certain privileges in life because you went to that school. You have those privileges there. So you understand these differences. You understand that your race and your color does not determine who you are as a person. The difference here, let's say in Canada, the United States is a bit different because there's a larger black population. Canada, we have, what, 3% of the black population. When you look at that there, we're all grouped together as this one black group. And unfortunately, we've been grouped together as a marginalized, poor black group, disadvantaged black group. So from the outside looking in, that's all people are seeing. So when somebody talks about the black community, we're talking about how to fix it. You know, we're not talking about what's good in it. We're not talking about the Dr. Vibes, what the Dr. Vibes are doing. We're talking about what the people that, quote unquote, Rob Ford are trying to portray. That's who we're talking about. You know, and like outside of Canada, that's why I always like to look at situations of being outside and seeing things from the outside in. I was doing research in Tanzania a few years ago, and it was the same thing. I asked somebody, you know what, how is it in a black community? And he's like, black community, what are you talking about? You know what I mean? I'm just trying to eat. I'm just trying to go to work. Full stop.
Wow.
You know?
Wow.
That's it. Yep.
Wow, that's large. So where and how can this be turned around in your opinion?
Honest conversations. Like, I mean, when I say honest conversations, just check your baggage at the door. Check your degrees at the door. Check your iPhone at the door. Check your Jordans. I mean, check it all at the door, man. Like, and this is not just for black people. I mean, and this is one thing that I've definitely, and I hope some of my students are watching, this is one thing that I've learned teaching this class of women's studies, that every time I go into that classroom, I need to check who I am as a man. I have to do that. I need to check myself and understand that, okay, well, I have all these preconceived notions. It's not my fault. This is how I was socialized. And this is how we socialize kids and gender, boy, girl, growing up. So I check myself at the door and say, you know what, Chris, you got to come with an open mind. And people think that's very easy to come with an open mind and checking egos, and it's not. It has to be something conscious. You have to be consciously thinking about that. And so I think that's one of the biggest things we need to do to change this and make this better is to check who we are. You know what I mean? And every time I talk about identity, people don't generally ever sit down and ask themselves, who am I? Nobody ever does that. They never ask themselves who they are and how they got to who they are. They don't. Because it's hard.
But Dr. Chris, that's going to take a lot of socialization, right?
It is,
because we're sharing about something that's been in existence for a long time.
Yep.
You know, it's been going on for a long period of time. You realize that?
Yeah, I agree. This is not one of those things where in my lifetime, I don't think that will change. I'll tell you right now, the plus, I'll say the one plus, though, is, and I'll speak in the Canadian case, that when we start getting into not just the second and the third generation black Canadians, when I start saying that my great-great-great grandkids only know Canada, they've only been socialized in Canada, I think that's where you going to start seeing more similarities and then differences. And you're right, Dr. Vibe, you're beyond right. This is something that's been going on long before me, long before you, long before
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yep.
So then you've suggested places. Are you seeing not only amongst in yourself, but more blacks acknowledging this? And at least acknowledging it would be a start.
Yeah. No, I see it all the time. I see it all the time, especially I'd say my cohort now. And that's the thing, acknowledging is a start. I'm not saying go and burn your degrees. I'm not.
No, well, I think your mother would give you licks if you did that.
Exactly. No, it's true. It's true. I'm not saying to live on the street and say, give up all your material possessions. No. You're right. Just acknowledge. Just acknowledge that it wasn't your fault that somebody is disadvantaged, and it's not your fault that you had some advantages that they didn't. So before I tell you to go out there and try to help somebody, I'm just saying, acknowledge it first. Acknowledge it, and then you can start this self-reflection of who you are and how you operate in the world. And that's where I really started this whole thing, too, on white privilege. So I don't have a problem with you being white and having privilege, but I have a problem with white privilege, because if you have your white privilege and you're just moseying down around the world with blinders on and ignorant, thinking, okay, everything I do is because I did it. No.
Right. Right.
No, acknowledge it. Yeah.
I guess it must disturb you then that there's been white privilege for such a long time, and now you're seeing it enter or be part of the black community also.
Yeah. I don't know if it disturbs me, because, I really see the world in terms of class. Right, and that's why when you look outside of Canada and you look outside of I'll even say the U.S. as well, when you go to predominantly black countries, say for example, and this is one thing that I love, every time I step off a plane to any island in the West Indies, I see a black pilot. Well, sometimes I even see a black pilot. I see a black taxi driver. I see a black guy picking up garbage, and then I see a black doctor. Then I see a black guy in a suit that run in the airport. So right there and then, your whole mindset changes, because here we never see those things just in your face all the time. So those things exist, and especially if you have come from a predominantly black or predominantly non-white country, that is your norm. So class is your norm. Here in Canada, we all like to believe that we're all part of this middle class and blah, blah, blah. We're all happy and fun together. No, that's false. That's this whole concept of false consciousness.
But Dr. Chris, some people may say to you that you're talking so much of class and not forgetting the point of race.
It's true. It's true. But then you start getting into these intersectionalities, and I agree, you get to the intersectionalities of race and class. And the problem in Canada, well, and I would even say in North America, is that race and class are synonymous. If you're black, you're poor. If you're poor, you're black. And so it's difficult for me to stand on one side or another when, you're right, you can't ignore the two. They work synonymously. But then the problem is, if I look at myself, And that's where I always start, from the self-reflection of my own black identity, that I can't look in the mirror and say that I'm poor and black. I'm black, but I'm not poor. You know what I mean? So I look at myself first, and this is self-reflection of who I am. And that's why I keep on saying that this is me talking for myself. I'm not talking for a group of black professors. I'm not talking for a group of middle-class blacks. No, I'm just talking about my own personal experiences.
Well, you have been chatting about this black privilege thing for the last few minutes with us, and do you get contested on this thought process by blacks?
Of course. It's the same. It's the exact same way, because it's like, well, no matter what class you're from, it's the whole. It's the thing when you talk about what do you call. I'm not going to say the word, but I think it was Chris Rock had a joke. What do you call a black doctor? He uses the N-word, right? And so it's the same right there. It doesn't matter what position you are if you are black. It's the same thing if you're a woman. If you're a female doctor, it doesn't matter because you're still a woman. You know, so we're reduced to see this reductionist essentialization of who we are as racialized and gendered bodies. And so it's difficult, because I understand that's how the world works. I understand that's how society works. I understand that we're having a conversation right now, and you're referring to me as Dr. Chris. You're referring to my credentials, and you're referring to my privileged position. But as soon as I walk down the street, I'm just a black guy. Full stop. I don't get that benefit of the doubt. Period.
Oh, that's true, and me the same. So
yeah, you know.
we're coming from the same exactly. Core right there. No difficulty.
Yeah.
When blacks contest you on your positions on things like this, how do you respond to them?
Honestly, I just feel like, you know what? I don't like to argue, because I know where they're coming from. Like, I understand that race, especially in North America, race is the foundation of all our social interactions. So I don't want to come into a debate, because what happens is I ostracize myself. I ostracize myself that I am that uppity black. You know what I mean? So I'm basically that same wedge I'm trying not to drive in. I'm driving it in by getting into these debates. So it's a really difficult situation. It's really a lose-lose situation.
Oh,
it's a lose-lose. It really is a lose-lose situation. It's sad. It's sad, because at one point I want to be honest with myself. I want to be, and not only do I want to be honest with myself, I want to be honest with what my parents did for me.
Right.
And what my family has done for me, but at the same time, I see the world that is bigger than me just sitting in my family. It's much bigger than that, and other people have different situations and different problems. So it's, I don't want to say it's a lose-lose situation, but it's you need to be confident with who you are, and I think the conversations you need to have are with people who are very open and honest as well first, and then you can go. I'm not saying go on a pulpit and start spewing these things out on Black History Month. No, because the wrong person picks up what you're saying, it's going to turn into something completely different. But you need to have these honest conversations with people in your cohort, people that you know are like yourselves, and say, hey, man, you know, your parents came in the same situation as you. You got the same things as I did. You're like, yeah, you know what? That's kind of, we came from a privileged place. Then you get the ball rolling.
Okay. Well, before we let you go, again, we'd like to say thank you so much for sharing with us tonight, and any final thoughts and parting shots in regards to black privilege?
It's the biggest thing, I think, is there's nothing wrong, and that's why I bring the whole Drake example. You don't denounce what, and I come back to what your parents did. Don't denounce and don't pretend that your parents didn't help you get to where you are now. Yes, it was a lot of your hard work, but your parents and it may not be a mother or father, it could be an aunt, a grandmother, or whomever. They really helped you shape who you are as a person. Your privilege may not be the same as my privilege getting a degree, but your privilege may have been you succeeding in the music industry, in athletics, or so on and so forth. But the whole point is that people helped you get to where you are. So that's the basis of what privilege is, that somebody helped you. Somebody had to work hard, that they could bend over, that you could step on their back. That's like the foundation of privilege.
All right. So before we let you go, what's up next?
You mean in general, or?
Yeah, what's up next? Like, are you getting a break soon?
No, man, no breaks. I mean, reading week, I get a little bit of break, but that's when I got to start getting my stuff done, my own work. Good news is I'm trying to get my book out. I'm flying fish in the Great White North, so I'm working on that proposal right now. Hopefully that comes out in a year. I know, but it's a lot of work changing it from the dissertation to the manuscript. So I'm trying to get some little breathe time to work on that. Trying to get my publications out. And besides, enjoying my class, man. My classes, I should say. I'm having a great time. So I'm enjoying it. I really am.
Excellent. Well, how can people get in touch with you?
Again, you can follow me at DrCSTaylor. That's at DrCSTaylor. That's Dr. C.S. Taylor. Get me on there. I have articles on Huffington Post. Hopefully I can get another one out in the next few weeks when Reading Week comes out. Get another one out there. Hopefully on Black Privilege. Follow up on this conversation. You can get me on my blog. Actually, I have another blog too now. It's a course-based blog that I have my students contributing. It's drchristopherstewarttaylor.wordpress.com. That's Dr. So Dr. Christopher Stewart Taylor.wordpress.com. I have my students contributing their weekly, I call them their blog seminars that they have to contribute on issues on Black Canadian women's history. So check that out. They'd really appreciate it. They're really working hard in that class, and follow them and comment on their work.
That is good stuff. Well, before we leave tonight, I'd like to thank some people who were doing some tweeting about our conversation tonight. Kendra Lee, who probably is Dr. Chris's top 2 or 3 fans. Tracy Haynes, Ms. Height, Abomi Kofi. Thank you so much for all the support.
Thank you. Thank you.
Definitely. So if you want to check Chris out, he's giving you the information. We'll also provide it as part of this post. It is the Dr. Vibe Show. Remember, you're blessed and highly favored. You're a magnet for miracles. You're a solution for someone's problem. You can catch me at the drvibeshow.com, the Dr. Vibe Show. All my contact information is there. You can also check me out at the Good Men Project, where the featured shows of the Dr. Vibe Show are posted. We are the only online show to be featured there on a regular basis. I'm also the monthly host of their Google Hangouts for their premium members, and more to come. So, as always, I like to say, God bless, peace be well, and keep the faith.